I call this meeting of the Isla Vista Community Service District Policy Committee to order at 6:04 p.m. We'll do a roll call. Director Freeman here, Director Geis absent, and Director Hedges.
Here.
All right, we have 2 of our 3 directors. We can continue. I'm supposed to announce that the meeting is being recorded. My old agendas didn't have that part. Nor did my agendas have this next part, land acknowledgement. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, who call this place, Anaskoyo, the land that Isla Vista sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding.
Awesome.
All right, so looking over, we're doing our agenda. We've got approval of policy committee minutes, which we actually won't be able to do currently because Bob isn't here. So in case Bob happens to show up, we'll trail that item. We've got public comment, then discussion of press release policy, and discussion of 2020 objectives and goals, followed by reports, member committee reports, and general manager. Other than trailing policy committee meeting minutes, is there anything anyone would like to change in the order? Okay. Seeing none, moving on to public comment. At this time, any member of the public may speak on matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board of directors that are not on the agenda. The board will not take action on any item not on the agenda, except as provided by law. Is there any member of the public hiding anywhere that would like to?
Looking out there, nobody,
All right.
present.
Cool. Moving on to discussion and action items. 4.1, discussion of press release policy. The committee will hear an update from the general manager and give direction on how to proceed. The general manager is not here today. Maybe the assistant general manager has an update.
I do not have an update. Jonathan and I did not get a chance to talk about this. I pulled some data from the current policy manual, which refers to our social media and press release. So, for example, board vacancies. It says we're gonna make those announcements on our website and through social media sources and the local paper. It doesn't designate what that social media might be. Does it have to be Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter? Is it simply our website page? Doesn't speak to that. The committee selection meeting information also. It talks about, where is it? It talks about openings will be announced on the agenda. Openings will be admitted on the official press release. So I'm not sure about this official press release. That's something we need to discuss as a panel, how you guys want to do that. A committee, I'm sorry. Then you have the response policy. You have the actual social media usage language, that one little paragraph, and then the media relations. This is all we have.
Okay.
So we don't have a separate, at present, we don't have a separate press release policy.
To provide the context from forever ago when this agenda item was originally going to be something that needed to come to policy committee, particularly since it might not be on Director Hedges' radar since he's new to the committee.
Right.
There was a press release that was published by the Isla Vista Community Service District, which was relating to an unfortunate sexual assault issue that occurred in the community.
Yeah.
And the process by which that press release had happened seemed to be 2 or 3 directors got together, did most of the writing, provided it with the general manager, and it got published in the name of the district. And there's this question of whether or not we should have some kind of policy in place to process that.
Yeah.
One of the concerns that had been brought up by one of the directors at the time on the full board was that the wording may have put us in an adversarial stance to somebody who's involved currently in relation to the lawsuit. I think it was just partly was the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
But one of the concerns that I had brought up is the idea that I felt that it should be more staff's process for doing press releases as opposed to board members who are working on press releases.
Right.
Particularly because then the press release comes out and it has quotes from board members, and it starts to almost turn into a an advertisement for particular board members or points of view of particular
Yeah.
board members.
Yeah.
If we're going to have quotes from board members, then maybe there should be some kind of opportunity for every board member to contribute a quote. Really, but really, like public funds shouldn't really be being spent on things that like highlight board members. And so this got referred to policy committee then in order to look into what might be a more formal process, and I felt maybe a more staff-driven process for making press releases. I had personally I had no concern with the premise of the press release, and I had no concern with the sending press releases in those scenarios. But I just felt like there's something that should be less a couple members of the board. And
Well, because otherwise it's
Yeah.
not a consensus document that's going out. I mean, what's going out then is the opinion of those that were verbal.
From the board, yes. At
Yeah.
least from the staff's perspective, we've hired staff in order to run the
Right.
district,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so we have kind of like an indirect consensus on staff being the voice of the
Yeah,
district, and so
yeah.
I always feel very comfortable having staff be the frontline representation at
Yeah.
meetings and various things. But
Yeah. And we would be comfortable if it was something agreed to, voted upon, that went out, and one of us spoke that consensus publicly. That's one thing, but if it's something that really hadn't gone through been vetted in a sense by the whole board, it's potentially, they're speaking for me, they're speaking for those that weren't necessarily there without consensus.
So you have language in section 9.5 where it says media relations,
Yeah.
which I think must have been derived based on your conversations about this, because this reads just
I believe
almost
this
exactly.
I believe
is
this predated that.
It did?
Yeah.
Oh, well, then they were on target. Because it talks about board members making their own position known. The fact that the general manager is the authorized person for making comments on behalf of the CSD. Yeah, I'm gonna let you guys look at that.
Yeah, I get people out there all the time asking me for opinions about the CSD, and I'm very cautious to say, well, no, that's not prepared to answer that.
You just said something that was in here that I'm not finding right now about the general manager being authorized.
The board.
You just mean A,
pre-
yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I feel like if we have a press release coming out from the district, it also shouldn't really be the goal here of the board president is making them statements on behalf of that was more like when we were writing this. Reporters asking questions or something, and even that I actually at some point want to go back through and try to really get an understanding of all the places where we had something with the board president. Another piece of context is that when we first put together a lot of our policies, we didn't have a general manager.
Yeah.
And then when we
yeah.
had a general manager, we had an extremely part-time general manager.
Yeah,
And so we left ourselves a lot of outs in order to allow
Yeah,
for our
yeah.
board president who was able to be
Yeah.
very. Thankfully, we had somebody who could actually spend nearly all their time working on it.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah.
But at some point, I'd like to go back through and really look through all those. But I think the idea here that what I'm looking for is something that is like a process that we come up with for deciding what types of things that the IVCSD might make a press release about, and then what process occurs in order to get the text for that press release. And I'm personally okay with a relatively broad idea on staff control of when and what, but I am looking for some kind of process for the text that's and again it might just be as simple as staff puts together press releases, but I was uncomfortable with the process of having 2 or 3 board members work to essentially end up with a document that had a lot of quotations from 2 or 3 board members, particularly strong opinions on particular topics that then were being output as as the districts, and then like
Yeah.
George and I particularly having, like we both stated it during the meeting, having come back and just being like, well, we found out about the press release because we read about it on the Daily
Yeah.
Nexus's announcement that the press release had happened
Yeah.
in the way that, so
Okay.
And that was awkward.
it was somewhat awkward.
Yeah.
But and it yeah, I again, I didn't have an issue with the idea of having a press release in that particular topic, but I felt that the press release in that case should have been just just written by the general manager as opposed to being driven by the board.
Yeah, yeah. Or a selection of the board.
Yeah, I mean, to be very explicit about it, one could imagine, for example,
Yeah.
I don't think that if I ended up going to, as in like, I want to put out a press release on this, let's quickly put out a press release on this, come on, let's get the press release out by tomorrow, I don't think that would happen in the same way as the board members who were doing it. Like, I think it's an unfair process in some sense about like what ends up being able to be driven without board approval as the district's voice. So
So when you talk, I mean, so here you do speak, I mean, the policies speak
Yeah.
clearly to media relations, but not necessarily how you would manage the process for a press release.
yeah. So by the way, I might process wise.
Yeah.
There. So before you were on our staff, and before we had even some policy and things, what oftentimes we would end up doing is we would sit around the policy committee and we'd quickly draft up some policies. I would have some policies. We'd put in that shifted then to having more of our policy interns working on these things. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of like providing since we particularly didn't even really have like a draft or anything to look at. I'm just providing input on where I would like to see it go, and then we
Okay.
can see, Father John agrees, disagrees.
Yeah.
He seems to be doing a lot of nodding in agreement.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the idea,
Yeah.
I would imagine process-wise, is that based upon how we've been doing it recently, I'm not saying we have to, I was fine doing it the previous way too, is that then this would go back through maybe you to our policy interns who would then provide back, or you would draft, or somebody would end up drafting a thing. If you would prefer me to come back in a subsequent meeting with a draft, or you prefer me to just try to write something quickly right now, I'm happy to do whatever process staff would like to see for this. I mean, another thing, just make certain that you always know this, is that when we had started this committee was back when we didn't have the general manager, and we were just kind of trying to put everything together, and so
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of the legwork on everything, and then the idea kind of purposefully was to make certain that whenever possible I transition something off to staff, because like maybe boards shouldn't be taking that kind of active role, but I'm also like I'm happy to do whatever staff wants me to do.
Okay.
I'm very flexible on this.
Okay, well, at present, the intern, we don't really have policy interns.
Okay.
Because the work has evolved, because
Yeah,
the CSD has evolved.
Yeah.
So, the interns now have been working on a lot of other
Hopefully,
project.
hopefully maybe even more important things.
Yeah, I think so.
That's great. Yeah,
But-
so I'm happy to come back with a draft of what I'm looking for at the next meeting if
But
that's.
it doesn't mean that the staff can't direct the interns to do some work and research on a press release policy and draft a policy, if that's what the policy committee would prefer to see. I think they would need I think though, we should ask for a little bit more direction. And I say that because you mentioned two things that stood out for me. It was types of press releases and then the process for the text in press releases. I think those are two things that I'm not clear on, and I don't know if that's, I think that's info you want to see in a policy. Is that right?
The first one I'm imagining is something that. Okay, well, concentrate on the second one. The second one to me feels like relatively to me feels like a simple thing for what I would most like to see, which is like, and this is my personal opinion, is not even the opinion of this committee yet, much less the opinion of the board. But what I would like to see from that is something very simple in the form of press releases that are published by the district shall be written by staff.
I see, okay.
But the question then becomes, and I could see somebody then at some point later coming up, like a press release gets published, and then somebody on the board is like, well, why did we choose to put out a press release on this as opposed to putting out a press release on that? And then I could see staff even particularly wanting there to be some more concrete guidelines on, well, when should we bother? Should we, for example, you could imagine a policy which is simply the district shall make press releases about upcoming district activities and local community emergencies, but otherwise no. Like we're not, like if somebody comes to us with a big event run by another district or something, that we're not going to put out a press release about their event. We're not going to put out a press release about an issue coming before the county board of supervisors.
Right.
That's like, you can imagine all sorts of things. Or maybe somebody's like wants to see those happen, and then it's just a matter of making certain that staff feels comfortable that they aren't being left in a lurch with the idea of having to decide arbitrarily and then get called out by the board when they made the wrong call. And so that's why. But I'm currently rather flexible on that first part, which is when and what. The reason why I was interested in seeing this referred to policy committee is that I felt that we should have a process for the construction of press releases that was more driven by staff and then more completed by staff.
And not individual staff, but staff as in general manager.
Yeah, generally what we've been doing is we just say that the general manager is the person who has that authority, and then they can delegate that as required.
Yeah, the writing of it may have been done by the assistant, that there should be a collaborative, check and balance just to make sure before something goes out. You really want two people to look at something before it goes out, I guess is what I'm saying. Wouldn't it be nice if I had someone to evaluate everything that I was about to say in public before I said it? There are a couple of things I've said in public that I have wanted to catch it while it was still in midair, and so it's nice to have things evaluated by another.
Well, I'm making these notes, so these are things that we can certainly look at to include in a policy. I hear you when you say types of press releases. Are you looking for staff to identify,
I'm kind of bringing
and
this
set
up.
that forth in a policy too?
I'm kind of bringing this up brainstorm process with you because I felt that that's something that you would come back to me with at some point in the future if we left it out.
Yeah.
Sad that it wasn't there. And so that's where I'm kind of bringing it up. Like the simple fast fix for, I believe, all the concerns that occurred during the board meeting when this actually the incident had happened was more to just have it so that press releases shall be drafted by the general manager or staff that are authorized by the general manager and will be published as staff, essentially. I think that might be a sufficiently short thing, and I'd be happy to put together that, or I'd be happy to spend the time to help with the full policy. I don't know if Jonathan has opinions on this.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys would know better than me if
I actually
has
never
it.
talked to him.
No?
I didn't talk to him about this.
Okay.
We kept almost having this agenda item, and then either the whole meeting would get canceled, or there was one time when we could have had the meeting without this discussion without Ethan, and I was just like, you know what, let's discuss this later, because I really wanted to have this discussion with Ethan.
Yeah.
But now Ethan's not on our committee anymore, so we're not going to have that discussion with Ethan.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be a very complex sort of policy that we put forth. We can certainly draft something up. Staff can work with our current interns. We don't have policy interns, but we can work with our current interns to draft something up very simple as a skeleton on which you can then add more meat to build it out. If you want to, we could do it that way. Since you've given us this.
Yeah, that's right. Again, I get.
Unless there's something else.
No, and I'm actually very comfortable with the notion. I think that putting it in the hands of staff sort of depoliticizes it too. It's not. Then it's because we are. We may not be partisans, but we're political animals rather than sort of the institutional continuity of the district. And the staff really is the institutional continuity, sort of the foundation really in many ways of the district. We come and go, you know, but staff is something that is ensuring continuity and stability. So, you know, I think that's something that should be left in their hands.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we capture types of press releases. We talk about a process for the text associated with those releases. And we look to establish in that policy a system, or set forth a system of checks and balances before the releases go out.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I'm just going to ask that the policy committee definitely go back and review the mediation relations section of the current policy to see if there needs to be any revision, or if there's something that stands out there that needs to be expanded upon or given parameter to in greater extent in a policy for press releases specifically.
All right, I'm
Yeah.
certainly
And then
happy to do
And
that.
would also, one other thing that might help is public information officers. You know, I'm thinking of Raquel Zick, the new sheriff's department, and others in the past. They almost have a format in which they deliver a press release. You know, when you look at it stylistically, you know, it's like it came from the University of Chicago Manual of Style, or what, you know, whatever. You know, I'm sure there is within those manuals of style that are used by newspapers and public relations people, I'm sure there is kind of a specific format. So it ought not to be just sort of a free form, you know, whatever.
I imagine that that's something that, in the same sense that we have a document template with the
Yeah,
agendas,
yeah, a
that's
template,
something
yeah.
that the would more follow as a procedure that the staff would follow as opposed
Yeah,
to something
yeah.
that we put in the policy. But
It's cleaner and more professional if it looks consistent. You know,
I imagine our staff seem to care enough that
will.
they aren't just going to haphazardly do each other.
Yeah,
We'll make the good faith effort.
yeah.
I do want to coattail on, I want to speak on that whole public information officer, PIO.
Yeah.
This policy is not
No.
speaking to
No.
a public information officer. And unfortunately, we're starting to have dialogue where we're talking about public information officers and social media
Yeah. Managers.
At the board level, which is where it
coordinators and
is.
project
Yeah.
people. Those are, and I had this conversation with Jonathan, those are not one and the same. That
Yeah.
is not apples and apples.
No, it's not.
Case in
Yeah.
point is Justin's request. You know, that's very different than a public information officer, an actual public with a job title and description, and that's not what we're touching upon here.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
simply talking about outbound communications from the CSD,
And
official.
they're typically not
outbound.
emergent kind of
Right.
communications. They're not under pressure kind of communications typically. You know, it's not like a Nixle alert or something like that.
Well, interestingly, the press release that had come up for this was an example of
Yeah.
something where people on the board felt that it was like more of like an immediate concern, that something needed to be like put out right now.
Yeah.
And the extent to which that was true or not, I think, is an interesting argument. But
Yeah, and also what is our capacity to push information too? I mean, how quickly can we? I mean, other than putting it in social media, I suppose that can be pretty emergent and instantaneous almost, I guess.
That's true too, but I don't know that I would consider information on a social media page considered as a public information
Yeah,
release or
yeah,
a press release, an official press
an
release.
official,
Yeah.
yeah.
It
Well,
wouldn't, and even, we haven't yet, and maybe that's something as we begin to flesh this policy out a little bit more, maybe maybe we'll look, cause we're working on the website too, all the time, we're doing 100, but
Yeah.
maybe on the website, there's a section that's for that, well, you know, it's gonna be information, it's
Yeah,
gonna be,
yeah.
but is it press release information on a scheduled regular basis? Do we need to look at fleshing that out? Because I don't think we don't have capacity for emergent
No.
We do not have a public
don't have-
information officer, we do not
we don't have
have a
capacity
dedicated
even.
staff for any, it's just random things that occasionally will come up, it's like we'd
Yeah.
like to be able to tell somebody,
Yeah.
and that's,
Yeah, that's a step beyond what we've got on the table right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
I think it's a step we'll need to take at some point, but it's,
Well, I think it's.
well, that's a step we may or may not succeed in taking at the board level, but currently
Yeah.
the status seems to look like no.
yeah, yeah,
Things are low.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so, Jay, we have a motion
Well, we didn't
to
really,
direct, or do you wanna do
we don't need
something
a
with
motion
this,
for this
or?
normally.
No?
Normally
Okay.
what we do at this point is that you've got, some consensus direction from the
Yeah.
committee.
Okay,
And we're in agreement on what's been said.
Okay,
Particularly,
good.
because we're not, this isn't going to become a recommendation, this is
Right.
going to just be some work that you do and then come back
Yeah.
to us on,
Yeah.
so.
okay,
Yeah.
good, okay. Anything else you guys wanna see?
Is there anything,
That
yeah,
captures the 1, 2, 3 of it?
That's
you've heard a brain dump from me now on this, so. All right, is there any comments from members of the public on discussion of press release policy? Continuing to see no members of the public. I think we're done covering this agenda item, it sounds like, so moving on to agenda item 4.2, discussion of 2020 objectives and goal. The committee will consider and establish policy committee objectives and goals for calendar year 2020.
And this item was added at the direction of the general manager to me, so that's why it's on here.
Yes, and he's not here.
Yeah.
So, one of the ideas here is that there are some policies that we just kind of have pending to work on, one of which in particular being a policy on, are we hearing?
Was that the door? Can you see? Sorry. No? Okay.
A policy on legislative recommendations or
Yeah.
made by the district. So for example, when the agenda item had come before us to make a stand on Cat Canyon coming
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
the question was whether or not we should have more process for that. That got pushed to policy committee and then just got punted.
Yeah.
So that's another thing where I'd be happy to take a stab at putting things together. I'm happy to do, staff wants me to do on that. But the George in particular had referred this to policy committee, and the referral essentially was to look for some kind of guideline on when we would be taking action of that form. So for example, if somebody comes to us asking for in the Upper East Side of New York, there is currently an issue going
Yeah,
on with the
yeah,
delicatessen, we would like to take a stand on that. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
completely outside of the point of our district, but maybe taking a stand on a public safety related sheriff's department budgeting issue at the
Yeah.
county
Yeah.
might be right in our wheelhouse.
Right,
And so
yeah.
coming up with some kind of delineation so that when somebody, whether it be on the board or in the public, arbitrarily came up with an idea for something, that it would get, there would be some level of
Yeah.
filter. And I remember one of the descriptions that had come up was this idea that maybe there would be attached, like if you were gonna submit forward such an agenda item, that you would at least have a paragraph of explanation of how, like by whoever sponsored it in some sense, right? Explaining how it was related to the powers
The powers,
and mission
yeah,
of the
yeah.
district.
Yeah. It's gotta be in somehow or another in the wheelhouse, attached to one of the powers. I mean, if it's something that you can't sort of draw a pretty clear connection to one of the powers, and you know, I mean, you can do the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees of separation thing
Yeah.
and connect anything to anything in some ways, but yet it's gotta be pretty clearly something related to public safety within our district and, or one of the other powers.
Yeah, so I feel like I've now actually, I caused this by providing too much of an explanation in my
Yeah.
explanation, but we both said some stuff and we should leave it at
Yeah.
that. We certainly should not discuss
Yeah.
it right now.
Yeah,
But so that's the kind that is something I know we have pending existing policy, particularly that one I remember.
yeah,
And then for a long time before you were here, We actually we kind of kept punting, and this was from a member of the public that had requested it. I had also been interested in seeing it, but that member of the public is no longer gadflying our meetings, but it was relating to a sunshine, not policy, like there's a term for, might actually have been the California Sunshine Act or something like that, but like a sunshine provision that provide some more transparency in the process of some of our district does things. But that's something that, again, it's not a matter of just discussing today, I guess, because we're just talking about objectives and goals for our committee.
Not specifics.
Well, this is the opportunity though for the committee to say, okay, we do want to set up some objectives and goals for 2020. Case in point, we want to identify those policies that are pending. We want to prioritize those that we need to take action on. We want to review where we're at with our current policy manual, because there's some gaps in there.
Okay.
You know, or there appears to be.
Yeah.
And not so much so that it's these big negative holes or anything, but there's some gaps where we can tie things in much more efficiently and effectively than we have done. So maybe one of the goals and objectives for the policy committee is to review where we are with the current policy manual, those pending policies that you guys have kind of been punting around, and then identifying what you want to prioritize both in those policies, and then maybe even revisions or updating the policy manual, because things are changing and happening.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, one of the specific things, because it was Jonathan who put this on, but one of the specific things that Jonathan has occasionally brought up is the idea of whether we want to be concentrating on filling policy needs as they happen, or predicting policy needs going forward before they might be needed. So as an example of where this kind of got confusing was there is like to the point of nearly deadlock on whether we were supposed to be trying to do this sort of thing at all. But
I have a really bad joke, right? I can't help it, Jay. I'm sorry.
What is it?
The joke is, well, maybe we should talk about what we're going to empower the policy committee to do. What kind of power do you have? Based on your last Goleta Valley Library thingy, you can't do anything. You're working here for free and you can't do anything.
So like an example, there is the right now pending before the board is the Isla Vista Compost Collective and Isla Vista, and specifically a compost bin from the county. And so there's this thought process. Maybe there would need to be some kind of policy surrounding the compost bin. And so one could imagine that in parallel and in some sense unrelated to the process of deciding whether it happens or not, you could start delving into the idea of what the policies might be needed for it are. In some cases, it's something like, we think that we might start hiring a certain kind of employee, and then it's like, okay, well, maybe before we get to the point where the board suddenly says we should do that, maybe we already have a policy in place for doing it. On the other side, we are a small district, and if we spend time in policy committee, particularly if we have a process of asking staff to do stuff for things that the board hasn't even necessarily agreed to do yet, then it just starts being a waste of everyone's time.
And we have so many new things we're trying to get.
Yeah, so I certainly was never really on the let's go really far in advance of this sort of thing. But when staff brought something to us, I was always excited to look at it.
Well, it's like on hiring, generically speaking, we will be.
So in that sense, it's just a matter of I'm actually, I guess at this point, so we've gone through some various policy manuals in the past and have examined. Compared our chapter titles versus the ones that we have, and tried to find. I guess I like the fact that you have such a good background in HR. Maybe there's something that you just there's something that you're missing.
Well, that is a pretty good.
Well, that's a good question. Thanks, Jay.
I don't have a background in HR.
Yeah.
But the companies that I'm involved in, either somebody else essentially does all of that, and I pay no attention to it, or I just don't really hire anyone.
Well, you guys have done it. There's been a lot of work done. There's a lot of meat in the policy manual, but this is an opportunity for you guys to say, as an objective or a goal for 2020, let's go through that and identify where we have those gaps,
Yeah.
or what do we need to
Yeah.
tweak. And there's stuff evolving definitely that staff is gonna come to you and say, hey, we need a policy on this. I can think of, a couple
Yeah.
all the time. But it may be a good idea for you guys again to say, this is what we wanna look at, this is where we wanna go. And then that keeps the committee on track, that keeps the CSD on track. We're not way out of line with our policies. We don't have to change them all tomorrow. I just talked with Ross and Jonathan about our purchasing policies, because there's some little gaps in there.
Yeah.
The GM can purchase this, but then there's language about a bid, but then there's no outline for how you do it. So we have little gaps in there.
So
I'm calling them little
All
gaps.
right.
Yeah,
So one
yeah,
possible process for
yeah.
this, and I'm not pushing any processes. I'm just
Yeah.
one possible process for that. Certainly, if you were examining gaps, if you put together here's a as a computer programmer, there's this term we use all the time. I have no clue what actually maybe redline might be the normal term, like legal term, but from a computer we call them diffs. And so you've got the old version, the new version, you've got
Yes.
the diff from the old to the new
Oh,
version.
yeah.
And so if you just bring a diff to policy committee, probably we're going to look at it and be like, we almost entirely agree with that. Go for it.
Okay.
And then it goes on to up to the board. I think really in some sense we could, is again just one possible what process we have here is that we just act as a filter for the board, so that way it's just like if there is something that like weird, or if there particularly sometimes like something will come up with like an HR issue, that then there'd be like a progressive twist to it that it's like, yeah, that's what everyone does, but at our district let's do twice that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that happens before it gets to the board, and then at the board it's just so I don't know if you're comfortable with that. I don't know if that's putting too much workload on you to do something.
I think that's something I would need to go back and talk with Jonathan about, because
Yeah.
apparently, maybe he's identified stuff. And I'm sharing stuff with him, but it's as an organization, how do we want to
Yeah.
manage it?
Yeah.
Is that something you guys want? Does the policy committee want to identify those things, target those? Do you guys want to make up your list of stuff that was floating out there that you want to?
Certainly. Okay. My opinion is that if you've said that there are holes,
I think there's some more.
I feel you should just really
Yeah, provide.
plug the
That's
holes.
the policy. That's the policy manual.
Show us
I
the-
can,
show
I
us
can do
the-
that. I
Yeah,
can do
that would be great,
So-
because
But-
otherwise it's just
okay.
like, yeah, there's some holes, and then what's gonna happen,
Yeah.
I think, is that like, oh, we're gonna end up having a meeting where then we all stare at the document together, and then we
Yeah.
all sort of try to come up with some holes, and then like it comes out, it's like, if you know there's some holes, how about you just
Okay.
patch them?
Show it.
I'll
Yeah.
start identifying that. Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, and then we'll work on them one at a time.
And then those can be the things that if we're gonna look at the policies as they stand for revision.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
So we can identify those things. And then, I don't know what you guys had out there though that you were kicking around before.
Those are the two that I remember, was the sunshine and the legislative not suggestions, like positions.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jonathan has history on those two
Jonathan
things.
knows about both of them.
Yeah, he knows about both those issues.
Okay, maybe that's why
The
he's,
context of them.
maybe that's even why he's like, we need to, okay, so I need to ask Jonathan.
We had previously in future agenda items, some which we've done, some which we had a policy for looking at grant making. I think we actually finally did that one, or did we?
Saw some language
Yeah.
on that
We were
also.
gonna look on one for internships, like more specific policies on that. Apparently, we were gonna look at travel policies.
So you guys have stuff. You guys, that's why I was saying I didn't really want to go.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some. What I did is I just arbitrarily opened an old minutes, and I'm just looking at the future agenda items section. And so we were looking at, but there's some of these I think we did. 'Cause like on this is harassment, and I'm pretty certain we now have like a harassment policy, like an anti-harassment policy. Benefits, I think. Oh yeah, for like employee benefits.
You've been working on
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
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 That's going to be an ongoing always.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
policy process for donations. I think we have that. I think that's part of that giant one that needs to be refactored, that was like a copy of the one from the county that Bob spent a lot of time staring at.
I don't think I've seen anything in Okay, I need to
Oh,
go
yeah,
back.
in fact, I can, because in the previous,
Because Ross has actually, I said, hey Ross, what's the deal? And he sent me some info, but where have you
in our
guys
policy manual,
established?
yeah, we do have a, because
Okay.
and I can say that for sure, because in the minutes from the previous meeting to when we put that in there,
Uh-huh.
we were talking about updated policy manual review, and Bob made the comments that our donation policy is maybe too long. So,
We accept donations. Is that what you wanted? No.
yeah, we currently have an incredibly complicated one that involved, like, step by step how the taxes for them get filed
Oh,
and
that.
managed.
Right.
So these are 6 that we need to go back and even make sure that we've wrapped up, completed, or that you guys are comfortable with.
So apparently, so this is from, some of these actually might be the background on the things that I just listed. So these were comments from Bob mostly. Potential travel reimbursement modifications, clarify the general manager approval of expenses, contemplate implementing a per diem policy, and require conduct and safety while traveling. And then at the end, again, we may have already made modifications to this, but we had at the time there was this comment that potentially remove a lot of the discretionary leniency for harassment issues, and consider requiring an external investigator for harassment claims. I think we actually did have that discussion, and it was we I think did have that for the general manager, but otherwise the general manager was left had the ability to bring in the external examiner if
Is that
they
the
so wanted.
anti-harass?
Do we have an impeachment policy?
You think that was in association with the harassment policy, this investigator thingy?
Yeah. So the idea is that, for example, if somebody on the staff
Complained about
complains
another staff
that another
member.
staff member, then instead of it being another staff member, potentially in a staff of only 2 or 3 people, one of the people who's involved in some sense, the idea maybe we would need to have an external examiner.
Yeah,
but I think
yeah,
I think that we determined that the wording actually was currently such that could happen if required, but that
okay.
would not be. Yeah.
So we do have a number of things we want to go back
Oh,
over.
yeah.
I don't know. We had a bunch.
Okay.
We've had a bunch of
Alright.
random comments that we've made over the course of the last
Yeah.
year and a half of the policies,
I'm
but
so
like
glad you
it's.
guys are sharing with me tonight.
Yeah.
And I can open up more old minutes, you know.
No, don't.
the bad thing to
I
find.
like the list we got going right
The
now.
bad thing to find is if I open up an old minutes from back when Natalie was on the committee. Natalie was a policy wonk, and
Oh,
like
she
I would
really
just end
was,
up
yeah.
just typing up, like I would just be like taking dictation essentially,
Yeah.
and I would end up with these 2 pages of like
Yeah.
stuff that Natalie thought we
Yeah.
needed to do about policies. So, she was
Which
great.
is not bad.
Yeah, no, she was
Because you gotta
great.
She
start
was
somewhere.
great.
You gotta
Yeah.
start somewhere.
Yeah.
She was.
And you
She
guys
was a
have done a
force.
lot of stuff,
Yeah.
so, but there's a lot in there that,
Yeah.
to me, I'm only discovering it as I discover it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wait a minute, maybe there should be, so that's definitely something we should look at.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Is there any public comment that we'd like to see? Anyone want to make any comments on our? No one's here.
I'm not
All
hearing
right,
any
so-
voices, which is good.
Is there anything else we would like to cover on this agenda item? Do we feel?
I think we're good.
All right, moving on. This agenda's got a section on reports, even though it's a committee.
Yeah.
So, do we have reports from members of the committee? Are there any policy-related activities you've been doing over the course of the last, I guess, forever since you weren't on the committee before?
Yeah, no, it's
No.
just a county policy things.
Yeah, I know,
The
yeah.
the homeless stuff.
It's vaguely related. I went to the UCLA Land Use and Planning conference and ended up going. There was a lot of sessions that were by lawyers for lawyers, and
Yeah.
so it kind of puts you in the mindset of having various kind of legalese in these policies. All right, reports from general manager.
Who is, we have, the general manager has nothing new to report today.
Great. All right, and then we've got any commentary from the public on this. I've seen that. Okay, moving on to future meeting dates and future agenda items, and we've already been talking about that a lot, I think.
Yeah,
Is there
yeah.
any extra agenda items like to see from members of the public? Okay, our next meeting will be on March 5th, and for various reasons we should just verify that that's actually correct. So let's we've been having some fun.
And make
with
sure
that
that
recently.
5
So
March is.
March, that is correct.
That
That's
is
the first
correct.
Thursday of March. Great.
Yeah.
And then we will move on to a.
Oh, let me ask, do you guys want to meet in the community room if it's available? Because we can book it if you guys would prefer to meet there. I don't know if you're ever gonna have
I'm fine meeting here.
10
Yeah,
people
this is
or
fine.
not.
Well, and that would be the only thing is if, who's gonna show up from the public, but I suppose it would be more.
We once had a very controversial policy committee item, we had 2
Yeah.
people show up.
Yeah, yeah. So.
But again, I can always just list it as the I
It
Live in
might not
Community
be a
Service
bad
District
idea to have it over there.
offices, because the offices include everything that we have.
And then we can adjust as needs be. But it speaks to transparency a little better, I think, if we are in a more transparent kind of a location, then, this is kind of, if someone came a bit late, they wouldn't know we were back here.
Yeah, for what it's worth, previously when we had been listed this as the office, we were just having the meetings out there.
Yeah.
But
Where
that
people
was
could
before
see
we
you.
had as
I mean,
many.
this is a lovely.
We
cut
didn't have
from
much
the road.
setup. Like for example, where your entire desk was really nothing. And so what would happen is that I would just stand up a folding table, and then we would sit at that table, and it kind of made sense. But
Yeah.
now that we
I've
actually
heard
have
so many stories about that folding table.
structure here, right? It makes
We're
a
getting
lot.
there,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
We
I
really
can,
are
I can see that.
getting
I'm neutral.
It's
So
amazing.
it doesn't matter if we
Whatever
do
you
it in
want
the
us to-
community room or
If you,
the,
Yeah.
as long as in the boundaries of Isla Vista, I will happily get there.
And
Yeah.
it has to be legally. I think.
Yeah.
okay, so I'm just gonna continue to say, and I'm telling Jonathan, we're gonna post it as the IVCSD offices to include all of our, meaning all of our offices, because we're stating offices.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
yeah.
that counts as our office. Whatever, John.
Community room doesn't
Whatever.
count as
I
our
don't know. You know what? I'm going to not. I'm going to say that we don't make an opinion on that, and then if staff determines that that's fine, they can do it, including
Yeah,
you. If you
yeah.
determine that that's
Okay.
fine, but I certainly don't want to just right now say that that is for surely good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
And,
by summertime, we'll probably wanna meet in the community room.
Yeah,
It'll be a
yeah.
lot more comfortable
The
than being back here in this little
ventilation's
lot
better, yeah,
office,
yeah.
so,
Okay.
alright.
All right. So, ready to go?
I am. I'm tired.
All right.
It's a long day.
Okay. I move to adjourn this meeting. Wait a second.
I second it.
All right.
Being
And
adjourned.
any public comment on this motion? Seeing none. Any final discussion items
None.
here? Okay. Moving on to a vote. Director Hedges.
I.
Director Freeman, aye. Director Geis is
Geis
not here, and
absent.
so that motion passes 2001 at 6:51 p.m. Close meeting adjourned.
That's
Awesome,
good.
thank you guys.
Thank you. It really is growing up. Our what started off so awkwardly is growing up.
Yes,
I mean, we are making progress.
yeah, I see that every day I show up, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, because I've only been here since August.
Yeah.
So I have a very different perspective.
Yeah, and I am really proud of my community and what's been accomplished here. I look at it and I just go, look, you guys, anybody that speaks negatively of it just doesn't know what they're talking about.
They really don't.
So.
There's so many good things happening. Lots of events are coming,